Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are stepping way back in time to unpack one of the most dramatic, high-stakes power triangles in all of ancient history. We're talking about King Saul, his oldest son and heir apparent, Jonathan, and this young rising upstart shepherd named David. Now, you might think this is just some dusty story about ancient royalty, but it's actually this mind-blowing look at human psychology, absolute loyalty, and that intense tension between clutching onto power and, well, totally surrendering to a higher calling. We're going to explore exactly how these three interacted, and how a completely unexpected bond between two of them literally changed the course of history. So to really get this, we've got to start with this incredible ancient quote. The original Hebrew text actually translates to their lives being tied together. Now think about your typical royal succession story, right? The expectation is always that the ruling family will just ruthlessly eliminate any popular rivals to the throne. But the reality here radically subverts that whole expectation. Instead of a bitter rivalry, we get this covenant of souls between the guy who was supposed to be the next king and the guy who was actually anointed to take his place. It's wild. And this powerful idea of lives being totally intertwined, that frames our entire narrative today. All right, let's jump right into section 1, the heir and the shepherd, an unexpected mediator. To really understand this dynamic, we have to look at who Jonathan was before David even entered the picture. As King Saul's oldest son, Jonathan was the absolute assumed heir to Israel's throne. Historically, he's portrayed as this brave, highly honorable military leader. He had every bit of potential to be one of Israel's greatest kings. But here is a fascinating little detail. The literal translation of Jonathan's name means Yahweh has given or God has given. And honestly, that's not just a fun trivia fact. It serves as this massive psychological foreshadowing for his entire life. His very name is a huge clue to his actual purpose in this high-stakes power triangle. It's like the pieces of a puzzle falling into place because his name perfectly captures his dual purpose. God gave Jonathan to Saul as a son and gave Jonathan to David as a friend. So Jonathan essentially becomes this human bridge, a mediator between the two men. And his unswerving loyalty in that middleman role did two absolutely crucial things. First, it constantly highlighted King Saul's unworthiness and his really dark descent into paranoia. And second, it effectively confirmed and smoothed the way for David's election to the throne. Moving right along, let's look at section 2, forging a sacred covenant, the aftermath of Goliath. Okay, so picture this. The two men first cross paths right after David achieves massive, overnight national fame by defeating the giant Goliath. Naturally, you'd completely expect the crown prince to feel threatened, right? Like, who is this kid stealing my spotlight? But no, there was an immediate, unbreakable bond. The text actually says Jonathan loved David as he loved himself, and because of that, they made a solemn, sacred pact. And the crazy thing is how he did it. He gave away his royal robe, his tunic, his sword, bow, and belt. Now, this wasn't just a nice, friendly gift. Jonathan intuitively understood that God had not destined him to be the next king. So, piece by piece, this was a peaceful abdication of his royal future. He was symbolically passing the kingly mantle straight over to David. And this wasn't just some fleeting moment either. Their commitment spanned across years. We see in 1 Samuel 18 that initial bond, but later in chapter 20, they make another pact where David actually swears to show kindness to Jonathan's descendants for helping him escape Saul's wrath. And, spoiler alert, David actually kept that vow long after Jonathan died, tracking down Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth, just to show him kindness. Then again in 1 Samuel 23, they renew their covenant in Ziph. Their lives truly stayed tied together through years of intense, life-threatening political turmoil. Which brings us to the darker side of things in section 3, jealousy versus loyalty, the triangle of power. As David's popularity skyrocketed, this whole dynamic became incredibly strained. And the psychological contrast between father and son here is just staggering. On one hand, you have King Saul. He had zero love for David. He was entirely consumed with jealousy, absolutely terrified of losing his kingdom, and driven by this deep insecurity. I mean, the guy plotted David's murder multiple times. But then, on the other hand, you look at Jonathan. He was confident. He was secure in his own calling. While Saul fought God's plan tooth and nail, Jonathan just peacefully submitted to it. Even during his dad's murderous rampages, Jonathan was quietly working behind the scenes to intercede, desperately trying to reconcile the two men. Now let's dive into section 4, submitting to divine will, surrendering the throne. Think about the sheer pressure Jonathan was under. As the firstborn, it would be the most natural human response in the world to be intensely envious of David or to just cling desperately to power. But Jonathan never caved to that envy. He totally understood he had no right to a throne if it wasn't God's will. And we see the ultimate proof of this when Saul is literally hunting David down in the wilderness of Ziph. Jonathan risks everything to go find David, not to capture him, but to hype him up. He looks at his supposed rival and says, "Do not fear, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find you. You shall be king over Israel, and I shall be next to you." He pledged to be his second in command, actively encouraging him while his own father was out for blood. It's just unbelievable character. And that leads us right to the emotional climax in Section 5, the legacy of true friendship beyond the throne. Tragically, Jonathan doesn't actually live to see David take the throne. He dies in battle right alongside his father, Saul. And when David gets the news of Jonathan's death, all that raw emotion just spills over. He cries out, "How I weep for you, my brother Jonathan. Oh, how much I loved you, and your love for me was deep, deeper than the love of women." This is a heartbreaking, soul-crushing lament. It really underscores a connection of pure, unconditional love. Through their covenant, they had become closer than actual brothers. Losing Jonathan shook the newly anointed king to his absolute core. So, what does this all mean for us today? If we want to understand what it really means to have your lives tied together, we just have to look at these universal tenets of genuine friendship that come straight out of this ancient text. Jonathan and David's bond was built on absolute fidelity. We're talking about a lifelong commitment that literally spanned generations. It required immense personal sacrifice. Jonathan gave up a royal future. It meant constant cooperation in the face of literal death and a deep, unshakable emotional attachment. For sure, that is what a true covenant of souls looks like. To wrap up this explainer, I really want you to think about their sacrifices and that unbreakable emotional bond. Let's be honest, we live in a world that is obsessed with power, right? With climbing the ladder, protecting our own status, kind of like King Saul. But the legacy of Jonathan completely challenges all of that. It forces us to look at our own lives, our own willingness to genuinely support others, and the quality of our own relationships. So I'll leave you with this one thought to chew on. In a world obsessed with power, who is the Jonathan to your David? Thanks so much for joining me on The Explainer today, and keep seeking the deeper meaning behind the facts.